So, hello everyone. Thank you again for joining. My name is João. I work in programs here at Wings. This session is part of the work of the Latin American Affinity group here at Wings that works to increase collaboration, connection, and peer learning for organizations in the region. Today, we are here to discuss and reflect on the importance of the advocacy for philanthropy work by sharing concrete experiences and learnings from the advocacy in the LAC region and in the world. Moderating the call today, we have João Paulo from ABCR, the Brazilian Association of Fundraisers, and we also have two speakers, Yessenia Soto from CIVICUS and Okinyi from the East Africa Philanthropy Network. I want to thank them for taking the time to present this session, and now I will leave you with our moderator, João Paulo.
Okay, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I want to thank Wings and Bia for putting this up, for arranging all the webinar and inviting our other guests as well. This is a very relevant issue that we will debate this morning or this afternoon, depending where you are listening us from. And advocacy, it's a growing concern for many of our Latin American countries. I can say about Brazil, of course. ABCR, the Brazilian Fundraisers Association, the organization that I'm leading as a CEO, has been putting a lot of effort on advocacy issues for the development of the sector and the ecosystem of the sector in Brazil. I will not talk long about that right now. I actually have I want us to have the opportunity to listen from our guests first, but eventually I will also share some of our insights and learnings from the work we've been developing in Brazil for the last 1 year and the last couple of years, I would say. But let's first begin with our two most special invitees for this webinar, Yessenia and Evans. And I want to start with Yessenia, if she agrees with it, because she's bringing the experience of CIVICUS to the table. Yessenia is a communication specialist. She's been working for over 11 years now on Latin America and international nonprofits, international NGOs, to raise visibility and awareness about many issues such as conservation, sustainability, travel, education, and other cultural projects in the region. She's been in CIVICUS for the last year as a community engagement officer on civil society resourcing. And of course, she has devoted a lot of her time into analyzing and resourcing trends for civil society here in Latin America and Caribbean. So we are very pleased to have you, Yessenia, with us on this webinar. And feel free to share with our participants. We have almost 30 attendees right now. It's a great audience. Feel free to share with us your experience in learning on advocacy for social issues and how hard it is for us to fund this work. It's not. It doesn't seem as appealing to funders as projects do, but it is still very relevant if we are able to succeed on it. So thank you for being with us, Yessenia, and the table is yours.
Hello, thank you for the introduction, and welcome everybody who joined us today. This is a great opportunity to speak, as João said, about something that is concerning civil society funders, civil society organizations, and governments, I think, in Latin America and in the world. I just want to quickly introduce CIVICUS. CIVICUS is a global alliance of civil society organizations with around 8,000 members distributed across the world. And today we're going to speak a little bit about the challenges, about the characteristics and challenges of funding for advocacy, and we're going to focus in Latin America. We were told a lot of the attendees will be from the region, so it's a great opportunity to concentrate, focus on the issues in the region. First, I I think we need to take a look at what advocacy action is, what it means, and what it entails, right? Because I think it's right, it's different. Funding for advocacy or working in advocacy is different than funding and working for other development projects. So what does it look like? What is advocacy-oriented civic action? And maybe I just want to be clear when I'm speaking in this presentation, about advocacy, I mean all those activities, all those actions by which civil society is promoting or trying to promote a more peaceful, inclusive, more just society for everybody, especially for those whose voices have been marginalized. And also these actions by which civil society is trying to fight against corruption, is trying to keep governments and power holders accountable. And maybe we can include also all those actions for the protection of democracy and the protection of the environment, which are very big in Latin America now. So I'm speaking about this kind of advocacy action, right? So what are these advocacy actors? Who are they? We're speaking about not your traditional civil society organization, or in your traditional, this is broad too, but it's not your traditional NGO or established traditional civil society organization. We are usually speaking about single citizens or activists or citizen movements who are generally fluid movements, diverse people, decentralized, probably often they're loosely organized. They're willing to take risks to promote these advocacy causes they're working for. And we're also speaking usually or frequently about grassroots, people in the front lines, right, in the community. And what actions are they working on? Well, I think this is also very important. They're mainly focused on promoting social and political transformation. I think development work in other development projects, I think most of us understand what I'm trying to say here. It's crucial too for communities. All these actions to work in education, infrastructure, health, all of this is great, but advocacy, at least for these contexts we're speaking today, is these actions that are trying to promote transformation, social and at a political level. So sometimes it's like for some actors, these can be like controversial activities, right? We're speaking about these actions are movements, are campaigns, are very participative, like the movements and the people get together and they include everybody in the decision making of the movement, in the cause, in the key messaging. So we're speaking about very live movements and campaigns. They are constituency oriented. These people who are trying to respond to their constituency, to their community, to the people, the marginalized group they're trying to defend or they're working for. And they can be a spontaneous movement, something that happens, as we say, overnight. Usually it's not overnight, but, like these movements that are very quick, and all of a sudden the movement picks up. But also, because they're spontaneous, it doesn't mean that they quickly achieve what they need. Where these actions might need, because we're speaking about social and political transformation, we're speaking about actions that might take a long time to achieve their goals. You cannot put a beginning and an end, like in a project. We're going to do this by this time. We're speaking about things that, that we're not sure how long it might take. And it might take. And usually, or frequently, this could be happening in challenging contexts where these actors might be fighting against even the government, fighting against laws, fighting against in restrictive contexts. So I think we kind of get the picture. So we're not speaking about your traditional established civil society organization or NGO, and not actions that fit within the traditional development project. So I think that's why it makes sometimes a little bit difficult or a little bit challenging for funders and for society and I think for all of us to work and to know how to do the work well when funding or supporting advocacy. So what does it mean in terms of funding? It means that funders, donors, really need to have a different mindset in supporting advocacy-related civic action. I like very much this quote by the United States Institute of Peace that says donors need to understand, they have to shift the way they understand and engage civil society and engage in action. And they have to have a creative and new approach, engage with non-traditional actors, and they have to be willing to take calculated financial and political risks. And I guess in a way we can say that supporting advocacy is also a form of activism. By supporting advocacy actors and organizations, we're also supporting their cause, and we're also trying to push for that political and social transformation. So I think for donors, yeah, it's not just a project, it's not just building a school, it's not just, it's pushing for change, and it really requires a different mindset. So let's go straight to Latin America. I think we know, we've read the newspapers, we've read the reports, and we know that Latin America is experiencing a little bit of a controversial times right now, with different governments becoming more repressive. Recently, I think it was the president of Mexico saying he will cut all funding for society organizations. So we're hearing a lot of news that make us think that this might be even a more important time than in the recent times to fund advocacy. So we know that half of the population, according to a CIVICUS report, half of the population in America lives in countries where the civic space is severely restricted, and that means they cannot protest or peacefully. The governments are going to use more power and be more violent. When organizations and citizens are trying to protest, and when they're trying to associate or do their civic action. 5 countries in the region, along with the Philippines, account for 85% of the world's human rights defenders killed in 2017. So we're seeing a lot of that people, human rights defenders, are at risk. They're working and they're risking their life when they're doing their advocacy work. The region, this is data I think from last year, 2018 maybe. The region remains, might be changing right now, but as at least one of the most unequal in the world. So there is a lot of need to advocate for human rights for everybody, and not only human rights, social, economic, and political justice. And as I said at the beginning, also some governments are restricting civil society's capacity to mobilize funding. So that gives us a little bit of context about the situation and why we might be needing to pay more attention to funds for advocacy in the region. There, I wanted to bring like a specific data to say this is how much civil society has for working in advocacy, but there is not that specific data. But we can see like overall is that in general, civil society organizations in the global south, in emerging countries, receive less than 1% of the development assistance. And it's not really easy to see like how this 1% is allocated, but checking the data, it is stated that the second intervention of ODA, yes, or that is channeled through civil society is government and civil society, which includes these purposes that we can, in a way, relate to advocacy. It's all that is related to governance, peaceful societies, more inclusive societies. So we know that if already civil society organizations only get 1% of the development aid, and this advocacy work might not even be a priority. It's not, I think humanitarian work is a priority. So this comes at a second place. So we might be getting that there's maybe not enough or not plenty of resources for working in advocacy. Another data that I found that is interesting is Foundation Center. They published a report of foundation funding, U.S. foundation funding for the region. And in that report, they found that 20% of U.S. foundation funding for Latin America is directed to the environment, and only 13%, which is like, I think this is the top 10, so environment is first, and I think human rights is like fifth. Only 13% goes for human right protection. So we see that, you know, it's, for donors, maybe advocacy for these kind of activities that we're speaking today is not a top funding priority in the region. And today we also want to share some of the findings from an analysis that Impactiya, which also it's a database in Colombia that work with CIVICUS. They track and publish opportunities for funding for not only civil society organizations, but for other development actors in Latin America. So with CIVICUS and Impactiya, we got together to analyze over 6,500 calls for proposals that accounted for almost 5.9 billion US dollars offered by 2,000 donors from 2014 and 2017. So the findings of these analyses, of this research, are not all linked to advocacy, but today I think it's a good opportunity to share some of the findings that we can link to funding advocacy in Latin America and understand a little bit more what are the resources and what is the support that civil society organizations have in the region to work in advocacy-related action. So this is a quick overview. We're not going to go in detail here. A quick overview of the feature findings, but from here we can see that from all these resources that I showed you that we analyzed, civil society organization only has exclusive access to 12% of these resources. This means by exclusive access, we are saying that they can apply for these calls for proposals and compete only against civil society organizations. So it's only for civil society. They're not competing with the state or private sector actors. So it's 12% for civil society in general working in the region, and only 3% of these funds are exclusively addressed to Latin American civil society organizations. So we're seeing that, you know, for the region, donors are not investing a lot in civil society organizations. And this other funding about human rights and political advocacy and activism, I think is probably the one we want to see more closely, so we're going to continue. I want to show you this other slide quickly to see what are the actors that are having access to these resources. I don't know if the text is big enough for you to read, but well, so we found that that actors in Latin America that are competing for resources include civil society organizations, international and intergovernmental organizations, like all the UN agencies, private sector actors, which is this blue bar here. So private sector actors have access to also a lot of the resources. And we also have individuals and state actors, or entities from the same states in Latin America. And I think it's important to see who are the actors who are having access to resources, to development resources in the region, because then we can see, okay, civil society has access to part of development funding, but there's also a lot of other actors who have access to development funding and could also invest part of these funds in advocacy. And of course, as I told you, only 3% of the funds that we tracked are exclusively addressed to Latin American civil society. That was from $5.9 billion, only 699 million for civil society organizations working in the region, including international and local Latin American organizations. And now we're going to see it specifically in our research. What did we find that we could, link to advocacy work? What is available for the change-seeking civil society actors in actions? And we found that from the resources, from that percentage of resources that civil society actors can apply to get in competition with other actors, only 5.5% included support for advocacy and change-seeking activities, activism, lobbying, advocacy, and human rights protection. And most of those resources were specifically offered to work in human rights protection. So there's very little for all the advocacy areas that are needed in the region. And the little circle in the middle is the resources exclusively addressed to civil society, to Latin American civil society organizations, which is only, let's see if I can see it here, it's only $167 million from 5.9 billion, only 167 million addressed to Latin American civil societies. And from this much smaller amount of funding, 15% in proportion of the amount we're speaking about, 15% included support for advocacy action, and most of it was for human rights protection. So we are seeing that in the rest, just to clarify, in the rest of the resources were offered mostly for more traditional development projects, for, you understand, projects, that are not these kind of activism, campaigns, movements, and all the other advocacy actions that we reviewed at the beginning. So we see that donors are mainly focused on the most traditional development projects, delivery of social services. Another finding that we could connect to funding advocacy in the region is how much money or resources, because for these analyses, we're looking at resources, we're looking at grants that offer funding, but we're also looking at research grants, capacity training, scholarships. So there's different kind of support offered, not only money. So how much or what support, how many resources are accessible to civil society that are working with vulnerable groups? Because that's another way in which civil society can do advocacy work, working with those that have been historically more marginalized in the region. And we see the first bar to your left is all the resources that were accessible to civil society that included some kind of support for working with vulnerable groups. And we're here speaking about women, children, people with HIV, young people, human rights defenders, LGBTQI. We're speaking also about people with disabilities, indigenous peoples, and migrants. So we see that all these funds that are accessible to civil society that include some kind of support for working with vulnerable groups, it's only 26% of the funds we tracked accessible to civil society. And of these, we have I think it's like 24%, the gray bar, that is all these calls for proposals that are not as specific, that that can include work with many vulnerable actors. And the other ones are the ones that have a specific funds for a specific group. So we see that in the region, donors are directing the support, the money, the resources for vulnerable groups, mostly to three groups, which is women, children, and people with HIV, and very little for young people. And I think right now, looking at the problems we have in the region with migration and indigenous peoples and land issues and environmental human rights defenders, it's impressive that the support for migrants and indigenous people is 1% and below 1% for migrants. So we see that civil society organizations are not having enough access either to resources to working with these specific groups that right now in the region might be the ones that need more support and more advocacy and more visibility, and there are maybe more urgent according to the needs right now. And then for civil society, specifically Latin American civil society, the support is mostly focused in these mixed calls for proposals, and then in indigenous people. But we're speaking about a much smaller. We're speaking about only $17 million US dollars. So we see that the support for vulnerable groups is also very small. I'm going to try to hurry. Okay, so what is the role of philanthropy donors in supporting advocacy? From this research, we also saw that most of the help is coming from state donors, including bilateral and multilateral donors, but philanthropic foundations, non-corporate and corporate, and other private donors are also providing a good chunk of the resources available in the region. And it's interesting because all these private sector donors together are providing 57% of the calls for proposals. So they're putting more opportunities out there, but maybe not as much money in total. But it's also like we see that they are playing a very important role in giving opportunities to civil society to work. Even though it's small grants, they're providing the opportunities. So I guess it's, with these, what we want to say is like they're putting the opportunities out there, and they should or could focus these opportunities also in providing more support for advocacy. So just to close the presentation, what do we recommend what should donors do to support more advocacy work? We think that philanthropic funders should be braver, should accept that to support advocacy work, they have to be willing to take more risks and be willing to work with the change-seeking actions in groups. They should provide more diverse resources because funding for development is very different than funding for advocacy. So you might need to think about funding, for example, rapid response support for those activities that might be in some kind of danger, or for these campaigns that happen overnight. They also need to promote better funding practices within their own philanthropy circles to increase support for advocacy, and also to strengthen civil society organizations and citizens so they can be more resilient when working in advocacy. Philanthropy donors can also lead by example, advocating themselves, not only by funding, but themselves, supporting a cause and being advocates against threats to civic space and other human rights violations. And also they should work together with civil society and together advocate for a more enabling environment for giving, for providing this support to a diverse civil society. Not only civil society organizations, we're speaking, as we spoke at the beginning, advocacy includes more diverse actors, and I guess together with civil society, philanthropy actors could push for this enabling environment by shaping behavior within their circles. Very important that they should fund problems and not only organizations or projects, and they should fund diverse new local actors, and not only the traditional ones or intermediaries. And also advocating for tools. We know that philanthropy actors have power and connections to advocate for these tools that could support a more giving environment for civil society, including legal frameworks, tax structures, and the like. And yeah, that's it. Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry for rushing it, but if you have any questions, I will be happy to respond at the end in the Q&A section.
Thank you, Yessenia. This has been really, really very interesting for all of us. I want to point out two specific comments that you shared. One is advocacy as a form of activism. It's correct. I mean, it's impressive how things happen. Probably all of you have been, if you're not from Brazil, but you probably have been hearing about the burns in the Brazilian rainforest. And we've been talking here with environmental organizations, and they've been reporting to us the increase of funding they are getting in this last week because of the activism that the Brazilians are wanting or have been inspired to do, and considering the advocacy they do in Brazil. And also, yeah, go on.
No, I agree, and I think that individuals are understanding this a lot more maybe than the big established donors, that they can support through funding, and they can be activists through funding their more beloved causes. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that's something we have to work on. And also the role of philanthropy donors in advocacy. We ourselves in Brazil, we've been working. Actually, ABCR is pretty much strong, or has been trying to work on enabling an environment for giving within the country, financial inclusion of the nonprofit sector, or the taxes we have on donations in Brazil. It's awful, but and to be able to relate with philanthropy donors on that, something that is really needed and relevant for all of us. And we have another speaker invited to this call, and I want to introduce him so we can listen to him as well, and after that have some questions and answers in the end. And Evans, thank you for being with us. Evans is the CEO for East Africa Philanthropy Network, and he will bring another experience and point of view on the issue for today. He's a really high experience and passionate executive. He has over 7 years of experience on organizational management and policy formulation implementation. And he also holds a master's degree in economic policy management from the University of Nairobi, and a BSc degree in agroeconomics from Anderson University. Well, really great experience and passion. So, Evans, thank you for being with us here. I'm not sure, are you in Nairobi right now, or are you speaking from, actually? I haven't shared that. I'm speaking from the city of Aracaju, in the northeast of Brazil. It's a very small town. We are celebrating today the Volunteer National Day in Brazil. I'm giving a speech on Giving Tuesday in a few hours. And where are you talking to us from? From Nairobi?
Yes, I am in Nairobi. And thank you so much. I think one thing I've learned that I need to work on immediately is my profile. But all the same, thank you. It's almost 6 p.m. in Nairobi. And so I'll go straight to the theme of the day. And first, I want to appreciate Wings for organizing such an important conversation. And for us as EAPN, this sits at the core of our strategic focus areas as an institution. My colleague has really covered much about the topic of the day, from the definition of advocacy to the actors, the actions, the resources, and how they are flowing in the area, the Latin American area, the role of the donors, and the various advocacy work that they are focusing on. For me, I'll give a different perspective in the conversation, in terms of looking at our experience as an institution in this theme or other topic that we are discussing today, then I'll look at some of the aspects that in our journey in advocacy, what we have observed when building our efforts towards advocacy. Then I'll look at some of the challenges that we have faced in this journey as an organization in terms of trying to access funding for advocacy. Then lastly, I'll focus my efforts in terms of looking at what are some of the success indicators when we talk matters advocacy. So the East Africa Philanthropy Network, we are an infrastructure support organization that supports the philanthropy space in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda. So basically, we cover the East Africa region. And as an organization, we focus on 3 areas, namely knowledge management, where we look at initiatives that strengthen and broaden the knowledge base of the philanthropy space. The second area that we focus on is around alliance building, basically conversations and efforts towards establishing partnerships and collaborations, again, towards strengthening the philanthropy space. And lastly, number 3, which is closely linked to our conversation of today, which is around influencing, the conversation around enabling environment. And over the last 13 years, we have invested heavily as an institution in terms of ensuring that our members and the broader civil society space in the East African region enjoys an enabling environment for the work that they do. This has not been easy. It has definitely challenges, but we can again count on some success stories that we can put on the table when we talk advocacy. Our journey in this topic, or rather in this issue, has been characterized by 4 major shifts. And earlier in our work, back in the year 2007, we had our first breakthrough, let me call it so, in the advocacy work when we mobilized the governments of the region and we came up with a tax legislative, a policy around the tax environment in the East Africa region. And we were looking at how to create some favorable environment encouraging charitable donations. And because we did not have sufficient grounds within the region to promote charitable donations. So we got out as a team, and I'll highlight some of the strategies that we employed by that time to mobilize the governments of the region. And by the end of the day, we had a successful advocacy which led to some benefits which the region is enjoying to date. Then a lot of things happened in between, and we came to the second phase around early 2013 when we were part of a committee, or rather a reference group, which worked around what we are calling in this region the PBO Act. This was an act of parliament that was established then that provides for establishments and operations of public benefit organizations in terms of providing for their registration, their administration, and the regulatory framework within which they can conduct their affairs and the purposes under which they are created. And then quickly forward, we had an experience within our membership beginning last year, and we have mobilized our members in terms of coming up with a collective response to anti-corruption within the membership of EAPN. So that is again another process that we've been undertaking, and the climax of it, where we'll be presenting that collective response, a document on best practices, and how our members have collectively come together with that anti-corruption policy in our regional conference coming up in September 24th and 25th in Tanzania. Again, beginning last year, we had an advocacy that we've been running within the disability space in two of the countries that we represent, that is Uganda and Tanzania. And as I will highlight in shortly, advocacy is usually a long-term process. And the disability one is one that we started last year, and we'll be going as far as looking at some of the legislations within these countries that we are talking about that can improve and increase philanthropy support towards disability, looking at the corporate side to all the other non-traditional actors that are supporting disability. Within, for example, Kenya, we've run one targeting the education sector, and we managed to bring on board the government side, the ministry in charge of education, and link it with the philanthropy space with specific focus to the technical and vocational training institutions. And that is one huge success that is on our table in the recent past. And so for us as an institution, we've invested heavily in terms of generating data on the shifting trends and the gaps which are existing within the space that we serve, so that we can identify the areas that we need to advocate around as an institution to strengthen the philanthropy space. We've also invested heavily in terms of crafting collaborations to create that inclusive voice and agenda, because as we learn shortly, advocacy, one of the success pillars of advocacy is collaboration, is joint ownership. And so we have invested heavily in terms of just ensuring that we create that inclusive voice and agenda around specific issues that need our attention in terms of advocacy. Allow me check with you whether I'm still there. Network is not so good today. Am I still clear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. So I'll go into my first assignment of the day in terms of just looking at the key aspects that we need to observe, or rather that we have learned to observe when building our efforts around advocacy. And I'll speak on around three issues. One, over time we have learned that if we have to run a clear advocacy initiative, then we all need to have a clear understanding of the different interest groups, of the different issues, of the different actors, and the different target audience that we are looking at. Until we have that clear understanding of the issues that will bring us together to advocate on the actors that we need to bring together to support the process, and the audience that we are looking at, and all those groups that may be interested in the initiative we want to run, advocacy remains a mirage. We've learned over time that that understanding, that clear definition of those groups, of the issues that we want to look at, of the actors that will support us in the process, and the audience that will consume what we are looking at, or that will be involved in the process that we are looking at, advocacy can prove to be very difficult. So with a clear understanding and building a common agenda that is inclusive of those three categories that I've talked about, the issues, the actors, and the groups, or rather the audience that we are looking at, becomes very key. We have learned that that common agenda and that inclusivity is very important for any successful advocacy. We've also learned that it's easier to conduct some of these things when we have, or rather when we use a collaborative approach, an approach that ensures ownership of the process. Because as an institution, one of our core objectives is to ensure that we build that critical and strategic mass of partnerships towards any initiative that we are running. And we've also learned that when people own the process, then definitely they own the product. And so just creating that sense of ownership, that collaborative approach to advocacy, and ensuring that there's a safe space for learning and sharing, then running an advocacy becomes easier than when we get hold of it as an institution with our regional platforms that we are having. Then we struggle if we take that approach of going into it as an institution. When we involve our partners, all the necessary actors within the space, and there's that collective ownership, it gets easy. The third thing that I want to talk about is the act of bringing together strategic actors, again with the strategic skills for us to achieve the desired outcome that we want to achieve within the advocacy initiative. As a regional organization, we pride in having a membership that is quite diverse in terms of the technical expertise that they have, in terms of the resource endowment that they have. And so we've learned to always bring them on board, have a shared vision in terms of whatever advocacy we want to run, and tap into their strategic skills and expertise in terms of ensuring that we move the advocacy plan that we are having in place as an institution. And for the longest time, I know that sense of collective ownership, that sense of inclusivity, that sense of collaboration, that sense of bringing on board all those many actors with different skills on the table has always counted hugely to the success that we pride in around this deal. Of course, all these initiatives, all these activities that we are talking about have always been faced by many challenges, especially in terms of funding. And I was so excited when my colleague Yessenia was talking about the resource, giving us the data around funding for advocacy in the Latin American region. And the case is not so different in this other part of the world. There are very few organizations willing to put in their resources in advocacy work. And so what we have learned is that most funders are normally interested in supporting short-term processes. And as we all know, advocacy on any specific issue drags for a very long period of time. So what we've learned is to involve the partners that we are targeting to support these causes, right from the creation of the advocacy plan or advocacy issue that we want to attend to as an institution. So we begin to involve them, and so they have this activity in their budgeting process and in their funding cycle, so that we do not get into trouble of having short-term finances to fund this initiative that we are talking about. So the challenge has been in terms of identifying the strategic funders to fund these processes. And again, as I've said, in this side of the world, there are not so many. And so we have embraced the concept of joint fundraising, where we involve these funders that I've talked about. And again, the challenge with that has always been in terms of reconciling schedules and timelines on any specific issue that we are talking about. And definitely there are always overlaps. And sometimes there's also competition, because in very rare circumstances will you find that everyone is on board. As you know, this side of the world, there's serious conversations going on around the shrinking civil society space. The governments of the day are not so friendly to the civil society space. We are a little bit lucky at the philanthropy side within that larger cake that we've created a very harmonious relationship with the governments of the day because of the activities that we are involved in. Majorly, most of them require their input and their support. So we decided to at least craft that niche in terms of engaging them. But again, you cannot be 100% successful in that line. So sometimes you'll find some overlaps. You'll find it's very difficult in terms of reconciling the schedules in terms of what we are planning to do versus what the donor had intended to do. And again, in terms of the timelines on the specific issue that we are talking about. Another challenge that we've always seen is sometimes the initiatives that we are running, it's not so easy. Not all of them, not all the time, but at times it is not easy to demonstrate impact. These are fruits that the members, the actors within the philanthropy space are enjoying. But in terms of putting and demonstrating and having it on the table that this is the impact that this process led to for the philanthropy space, that's never so easy in some of these initiatives that we are talking about. Again, from the donor side, most of the conversations, because it's difficult to find a donor who is just supporting advocacy. So sometimes the issue has always been how do they link this to their larger agenda? And so we have to think very strategically as a space, as a sector, in terms of looking at how we can link the conversations that we are having to the larger agenda of these donors that we are targeting. We've got to see how to embrace joint fundraising, because with it, we ensure that all are on board, we ensure that we have collective ownership, and so with the proper identification of funding partners, the process gets easy. In the interest of time, allow me go to how we normally see and quantify our success as an institution and the members, the membership that we serve. One of the ways right from the beginning is the amount of participation that you will get from members.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can we, is it okay with you if we move into questions and answers, and eventually you can complete what you have to say by when you answer one of the questions we have received? Because due to time and in respect of everyone being here and attending to the webinar, we actually are going to go for 10 more minutes past midday. We're going to 12:10 if you are in Brazilian time zone or whatever time zone you are. But we want to take some questions as well, Evans. Would that be okay with you?
Perfectly okay with me. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you, Evans, for your speech. And again, just like Yessenia, for sharing such relevant information and knowledge and experience with us. I want you to just remember, just highlight what you have said, specifically on the work you've been doing in Eastern African countries on the strengthening of the philanthropic space, but also in the idea you bring to us that advocacy is a long-term process that won't have success if we don't collaborate, if we don't work together. And that's pretty much it. I mean, as an individual organization, as a specific organization, standalone organization, we hardly will be able to work for a real impact in our society, and we have to collaborate for advocacy even more. We have actually two questions that were sent to us during the webinar. We also have a few questions that were sent in advance. We will go for 15 more minutes from now to give time for our speakers to answer them. but feel free to send messages either to me or to the chat room or to the Wings team. If we don't have time to answer all of your questions, they will be sent to our speakers and will be answered on due time. And I want to share the two questions that came during our webinar. One of them is to Yessenia, is a question about how does the CIVICUS get information about the state of the civic space in different countries, and eventually if CIVICUS, by doing this research, by doing this study, is interested in getting in touch with grantees who can share their testimony on a restricted open civic space within their countries. And also, we have another question. I think both of you eventually can answer them. Talking about someone is actually has shared their experience here that many funders tend to donate to advocacy activities that are aligned with their business interests. And how do we avoid becoming a company philanthropic lobbyist? I don't know if you get that idea, but how can we keep our priorities, our advocacy priorities, even we are funded by a company that eventually have also their own priorities? And this is a really interesting question. So I don't know if which of you want to start answering them. Feel free to take the stand.
Well, I can start with the question about the monitor, which provides ratings on civic space around the world. Actually, well, I think I am not the expert on the monitor, but we have a mixed approach. We have qualitative and quantitative data that is used to inform these ratings. And also we have members from around the world, and these members from all these countries are also sending their feedback and their data to us, to the CIVICUS Monitor team, to create these ratings. I think maybe later I can share with the group a link to the website so that you can read more in detail the methodology. But I think the great thing is that we have people informing from the countries, from the front line, and also I think maybe second part of the question was like if we're getting input or like the stories or like from the people in the countries. And actually, the monitor also we use to publish an annual report on the state of civil society around the world, and it includes usually, or after the report is published, also interviews with the civil society actors from all these countries in different issues that relate to civil society, thinking, civic space, and other issues. So we do have interviews, we have stories, we have editorials, and we have a lot of information that that is not only rating the space, but also hearing from the actors that are having to work in these different spaces. Does that answer the question, or happy to?
Thank you, Yessenia. And eventually, we will be able to reach out to you as well and to develop more on that. We also have a question from Christina on the chat room. She asks about the lack we have of indicators for advocacy issues, and that's correct. And sometimes it's really hard for us to understand the sector and have indicators to know how our work is developing, and that will prevent donors from giving, from supporting our advocacy work. And Evans, I would like to get back to you, see if you would eventually like to answer the previous questions as well, the relationship between the non-profits, the charities, and corporate donors of our advocacy work, and also if you want to share anything about indicators as well.
Thank you so much. In terms of running informed advocacy. For us as an institution, we've normally invested hugely in collection of data from our members, from the actors, and from the many convenings that we do. And then we use that data to come up with getting our priorities right on the areas to focus on in terms of advocacy. In this side of the world, the corporate wing of the civil society space, those organizations involved in corporate philanthropy, are rarely involved in supporting civil society space because of the fear of collision with the governments of the day. So they normally shy away from this conversation, and again from any advocacy that is involving or funds directed towards supporting advocacy of the civil society space. Most of the funding and good relationship that we enjoy is more with the civil society organizations and organizations involved in supporting philanthropy in this region. The success that we can talk about is normally demonstrated in terms of participation and the buy-in from the relevant parties that we want to involve or we are involving in these processes. We also see it in whether the laws and the bills that we are fronting are enacted. So that normally in terms of the milestones, in terms of enactment of these laws by the governments of the day. And we also invest much in terms of documenting these milestones and sharing case studies within the region as a source of inspiration for other regions that are involved in the same work.
Great, that's really interesting. And I want to add to that, especially on indicators, and that's part of our advocacy work as well is also to support and eventually also run research studies on our context and the issues we are working on. Because sometimes just not being able to answer specific questions that we would have to on our advocacy work it makes it harder for us even to get funding for advocacy. So we do need to support and support research and studies that will help the sector. And that's one of the reasons, of course, that I'm also really fond of CIVICUS work. And I'm actually a voting member of CIVICUS as well, because they give us back those kind of studies and indicators that will eventually help us on our work as well. Let me go back to a few questions we have that were sent prior to the webinar. There's one very, well, all of them, of course, are very interesting. The one specific one I have highlighted here. It is, how does public opinion about different forms of philanthropy actually influences our chances to be successful with our advocacy work? I mean, I will try to explain that, but people in different countries understand philanthropy in different ways. And how does that influence our chances to be successful on the work we do? Probably even we'll be we'll be able to answer that, considering that you work in different countries in Africa, and that event, then we would probably have different views from philanthropy and philanthropic organizations in each country. Do you have that feeling, depending on the country you're working, on the way that people see philanthropy and philanthropic organizations that impact your advocacy work?
Definitely, yes. The good thing with this side of the world, in as much as we are those many countries, the East Africa region, when it comes to the perception of the citizens or the larger public towards philanthropy, it has been very accommodative. We share a common cultural understanding of giving, and Africans in general were born givers. And so giving and philanthropy on this side of the world there's a huge public buy-in in the processes that are involving philanthropy and in the actions that involve philanthropy. And so the only thing that I want to delink from that statement is that when it comes to advocacy, rarely have we been involved or have we seen any initiative that really involves or is pegged on the public opinion, right? And so, in as much as they've been that supportive, the processes that we've been engaged in, very few, close to zero, have been in need of their opinion or their view for the success of the initiative. So I'll delink those two. What will majorly pegged our success on majorly has been the governments of the day and the other actors within the space that we serve.
Mm-hmm.
I want to add
Great.
to that maybe this is a great opportunity for philanthropy to work closer with those actors that have that are closer to the public and the constituencies, and maybe so that way I think maybe it's a trust issue sometimes. Like for a long time, private funds have been seen in this or that way. So I think it's an opportunity for working in collaboration, civil society working with philanthropy actors and with the individuals and working multi-sectoral. I think right now what we need is solutions that come from different sectors also, so that the public can feel more trust, I guess, also in the efforts. And we need to work less in silos.
Perfect. And justice is relevant here. Well, if you allow me, I will. We have some final minutes, last minutes before we close up. I want to get back to you so you can give your final remarks. I just want to share another question we got, and that is, it has to be, it has to be talked about. Someone sent us in advance a question about what do we do when the government questions the legitimacy of the nonprofit sector. And we just had this experience in Brazil with our president saying that the burns in the welfare were actually incited by the nonprofits, or started by the nonprofits. So how do we do when we actually have the government work against the sector, even on advocacy issues? And I'll give the mic back to you for your comments and final remarks before we close up the webinar. If you want to begin with us.
Oh, maybe I can
Okay.
do a little thing about that. I think this is something that has been long discussed, that for a long time, established organizations, NGOs, CSOs have been focused more in being accountable to donors instead of the public. And in those moments when governments attack organizations with these kind of statements, I think if you have that divorce from the public and telling the people what you're doing and showing results and showing impact and really, like demonstrating what you have been doing, I guess it's easier for governments to come and say these kind of things. And people might say, well, yeah, I've never seen what these NGOs and CSOs and all these people have been doing. I've never seen results. So I think organizations have to be closer to their constituencies. They have to start being accountable to them and telling them what we have been doing and demonstrating that the efforts, the advocacy efforts, and sometimes it's not easy to show short-term indicators, but I think over time there are social and political victories that will demonstrate that the work has been done for a long time and then it has results. But also having that constant communication with the people you try to benefit, but also with the general people will help, I guess, protect from those kinds of attacks from governments, and also by the sector working closer together against those kind of actors that are attacking and becoming repressive of children.
Thank you, Yessenia. And Evans, for final remarks.
I think as a sector, we need to work on this conversation around trust. We need to highlight initiatives and be engaged in initiatives that promote accountability and transparency. With those two, the government and the public will be very supportive. And that is one thing that we've learned in East Africa, and we have several initiatives around that in line with improving the trust of the public and the government, and promoting accountability and transparency in the space that we serve. We also need to continuously invest in demonstrating impact through provision of data. And in our conference that is coming, this is one of the initiatives that we are going to launch, what we'll be calling the East Africa Philanthropy Data Portal, that will be able to demonstrate the impact of the work that this sector is contributing to the larger national development process. In my closing remarks, I just want to reiterate on the need for us to continue investing in collaboration, investing in data on shifting trends and gaps that require our advocacy work, and embrace inclusivity in our approach in advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Evans. Thank you, Yessenia, for this.
I would like to just add a closing remark. We will thank Wings for the opportunity. I think from the point of view of CIVICUS and civil society organizations, is yes, we need to promote that change in the mindset of funding and donating and all the giving sectors, that advocacy is different and needs different kind of support and different kind of indicators, and it can work if we just, like put the work in thinking different kind of planning and activity. And yeah, and there's, I guess, around the world, this is the time to start. If we have not done that, it's the start working on that. So I want to thank Wings. Also invite everyone in the audience to follow CIVICUS on social media, because we will be publishing these reports and resourcing the resourcing analysis for Latin America next week on September 3rd. So if you want to download it, just go to the website. And thank Wings too, because you were participating in the working group in the analysis, in the work for this analysis.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you both for your insightful participation. It's really inspiring for all of us. It's been a pleasure to moderate this call invited by Wings. And I want to call Wings back. I think Bika will just send the final word to thank you, everyone. Is that correct? Bia, are you joining in, or should I end the webinar? We can hear you. Okay, well, I want to thank you all for participating, for joining in this webinar. We run here in the LAG group for Wings. It's been a pleasure to have all of us with us. Oh, I have a message from Wings that their mic's not working. No problem. We can handle that. I think the recording will be available soon for all of us to share or to eventually listen again. We will also be available through the Wings to have any other questions we haven't answered, or you want to reach out to one of the speakers. And thank you again for being here. And let's move on our advocacy work. It's really important for the sector, for the society, the city, the country we live in. To change lives and to change the world. So thank you, everyone, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, João, for moderating. Thank you.